Hello viewers, Assalamu alaikum. This is Shahana Jahan, lecturer, Department of English, Carmichael College, Rangpur. I am going to deliver an online presentation for the students of Honours Second Year on romantic poetry, and the selected poem is The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by S.T. Coleridge. The full name of S.T. Coleridge is Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and his lifetime is 1772 to 1834. He is a poet, critic, and philosopher. Born at Ottery, St. Mary, Devonshire, son of a vicar and headmaster of the King's School there. Famous poems: The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Christabel, and Kubla Khan. 1798 appeared the famous lyrical ballads in collaboration with William Wordsworth, to which he contributed The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Source of the poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The incident of the albatross was taken by Coleridge from a book entitled A Voyage Around the World by the Way of Great South Sea by Rocky. Context of the poem. The poem is written in romantic style. Ancient Mariner is the protagonist and narrator of this story. Poem is full of imagination, fantasy, and supernatural elements. Characters. In this poem, we find 6 types of character. Number 1, the ancient mariner. 2, the wedding guest. 3, the sailors, that means the 200 companions of the ancient mariner. Number 4, albatross, the bird. 5, death. And last one, 6, the nightmare, life in death. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a long narrative poem which is consisted of about 625 lines and has 7 distinguished parts. I am going to represent before you a short synopsis of the poem, part by part, gradually. Part 1. Mariner stops a wedding guest and forces him to listen to his story. The ship sails south to the equator. Comes a furious and thundering storm blast which drives it to the land of mist and snow. An albatross appears through the fog like a messenger of hope. The sailors hail it as a bird of good omen and feed it with affection. The ice splits, south wind springs up and takes them northward. Mariner shoots the albatross with his crossbow without any reason. This marks the beginning of their sorrows. Part 2. The crew get angry against his deed. They suffer from thirst, but no water to drink. Water, water everywhere, and all the boats did shrink. Water, water everywhere, not any drop to drink. This means that although there was water on all sides, it did not help the sailors. The wooden planks were contracting because of extreme heat. On the ship, the supply of drinking water was exhausted and more was not available, even though there was water all around them. The sailors hanged the dead albatross round his neck as a punishment for his brutal act. Part 3. A skeleton ship appears with 2 crews named Death and Life in Death. They cast dice, and Life in Death exclaimed that she had owned the mariner. Suddenly, one after another, all the 200 sailors drop down dead. Their souls fly away audibly, leaving behind dead and rotten bodies lying with open eyes. The ancient mariner alone is left behind to expiate by lifelong suffering and penance. Part 4. The wedding guest is afraid that he is speaking to a ghost, but the mariner assures him that he did not die. He is alone on the ship, and tries to pray but cannot. For 7 days he looks at the dead men staring at him and cannot die. He is persecuted by his guilty conscience and the cursing looks of the dead sailors. When he sees water snakes, he blesses them and finds that he can pray. The albatross falls from his neck. Part 5. He falls into a deep sleep, and when he wakes up, it rains. A roaring wind and a storm comes, and the dead crew rise and manage the ship to move on. The spirit from the snow and ice moves them to the equator again, and the ship stands still. But in a moment it begins to stir, and the mariner falls down into a swoon. He hears two spirit voices. One of them says, "The man hath penance done, and penance more will do." This means that the man has suffered for the crime and would undergo more suffering. Part 6. When the mariner wakes up, the spell is broken altogether. A gentle breeze begins to blow, and the ship enters the harbor. The mariner, along with his shipmates, reaches his own country. Part 7, and this is the last part of the poem. The mariner re-establishes contact with the normal life, but his appearance is so unusual that men stand in awe of him. The curse remains with him, which urges him to wander land to land, seizing upon people and compelling them to hear his tale. Major themes: the natural world. Though the poem is full of supernatural objects, we also find some natural touches, such as the image of light and luminous color in the sky and sea. Ice is green as emerald sends a dismal sheen. Life in death is with harshed lips and yellow locks, and her skin is as white as leprosy. The water snakes are beautiful because of their colors and the play of light. All these are the indications of natural world. The spiritual world. It had popularly interpreted as an allegory of man's connection to spiritual and metaphysical world. After attempts at prayer and realization of what he has done, his penance to forgiveness begins spirituality. I looked to heaven and tried to pray. Religion. It is a religious allegory conveying numerous themes pertaining to Christianity. Here albatross represents as a holy bird. The ancient mariner fails to obey God's rule and suffers much by curse. At the end of the poem, the ancient mariner kept alive to pass words of God's greatness into others. Retribution. The poem is a tale of retribution. Throughout the poem, the mariner spends most of his role playing for his impulsive role of killing albatross. Concept of supernaturalism. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a poem in the Romantic tradition with high imagination and supernatural elements. But at the same time, Coleridge had put a moral lesson for the readers in the poem. He shows that any crime, big or small, cannot go unpunished. Again, with true love, the suffering soul may be purified and regenerated. In the poem, there are so much incidents and scenes that cannot be explained by reason. Coleridge has created a willing suspension of disbelief. There is an strangeness in the hypnotic eyes of the mariner, the spectral ship with death and life in death as its crew dicing on the deck. The death of the mariner's companion and coming back to life is supernatural. There is something supernatural about the way in which the dead body of the albatross automatically falls down from the ancient mariner's neck into the sea. Moral of the poem: He prayeth best who loveth best all things both great and small, for the dear God who loved us, he made and loved all. In these lines, whole moral of the poem is summed up. The argument is that the best form of worship is to love all creatures, or rather all creations of God, without making any kind of distinction as we generally do. God has created this universe in which all great and small things exist, and He loves them all. Those who do not love God's creatures cannot love their Creator. Important questions. Number 1. Consider the Rime of the Ancient Mariner as a poem of crime and punishment. Number 2. Discuss the treatment of supernatural elements in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Number 3. Bring out the allegorical significance in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Thank you.